All right, we are live on Crowdcast, and I'm going to take us live onto Facebook Live. If you are joining us on Facebook Live, you can pop on over to crowdcast.io/Pi Ware and click on this event. You can ask us live questions, and we'll take them. I'm Pi Ware, the director and editor of Skin Deep, The Battle Over Morgellons, and I'd like to welcome Mr. Andrew Gross, composer, Skin Deep, and a couple of other films that we worked on together, which we're going to talk about.
Thank you so much. This is awesome. I love that we're doing this.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So by way of introduction, I thought like you could tell folks how you got your start as a film composer.
Yeah, I'll do a quick answer, and then I'd like to have you answer that same question if that's okay, because
I'm not a film composer.
Well, as a director, excuse me. Got my start. I had multiple passions. I didn't know how they related. I took film classes in college, loved cinema, loved music. I was in an Afro-Cuban, Latin, hip-hop, salsa band, and really loved technology. And then for college, I went to Manhattan School of Music. And I didn't really know why I was doing that, because that had nothing to do with what I was doing with my band. Where I would be studying orchestration and classical music. And it wasn't until I met a friend from high school, Jason Bloom, who had just started getting his master's at USC. And I ran into him and he said, "Hey, I'm making student films. Why don't you score my student films?" And I thought, yeah, that sounds fun. I mean, I love music and I love technology and I love different styles of music. And when I started working with Jason, it really became apparent that this is actually, it was the perfect fusion of everything I loved. Storytelling, music, technology, but especially fusing different musics. I mean, that's one of the things that I loved about film music, is that you really got to sometimes combine different styles of music together. And so I did his student films, and right out of USC, he got this film called Biodome, starring Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin. And he said, well, I don't know if I can hire you on this, but if you work your ass off and demo for it, which I was happy to do, there may be a chance. And fortunately, the producers liked my demos, and you know, the rest is history. And I've been scoring films ever since.
Nice. So you're asking me the same question, how I got my start.
I would love, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was always into, I guess in high school, I got into theater and filmmaking, and we were making films on these 1/2-inch VHS cameras, and we didn't have editing equipment, so we would edit in camera with our thumb. We would just start, do the action, stop, change the angle, do the action again, start, and just try and edit as we went. And in college, I studied film. I did some cinema classes, but I went to the University of Virginia and didn't end up taking any production courses, and didn't know what I wanted to do, and ended up falling back in love with wanting to make cinema. And so I made a bunch of experimental art films at the end of my years at the University of Virginia, and collaborated with some other people. And then came to Los Angeles, went to film school for a semester, thought, that's great, thank you very much. That's all I really needed as far as instruction, and then started making films with a film collective called Filmmakers Alliance, which is how we met.
That's right.
Yeah, we met through that collective.
That's right.
And then I was always impressed with how you would like call and check in. You're like, we haven't talked in a while, I'm just checking in to see if your movies are coming along, or if you need a composer, you know, let's talk. I was like, wow, that guy's very professional. And so when I finally, I think I did, before I knew you, I did a short film called My Beautiful Me. And then my girlfriend at the time, Susan Craker, and I were writing a script called Solitude. And it was a feature-length film that we were going to shoot on a shoestring budget. And we ended up hiring you, obviously, as you remember, as the composer.
I was thinking about this too. And I'm remembering, like, well, what was going on? I think I was doing King of Queens at the time. I was scoring a lot of comedies. And I think I was really, at the time, I think, why did I get involved with Filmmakers Alliance? And I think it was because I really wanted to branch out. I wanted to work on other genres. And and that's how we met. And it's what happened. I mean, I think working with you is probably the first, certainly dark drama that I had scored. So on Solitude. So yeah, I was just remembering all of this recently as I was thinking about it.
Well, I'm going to play the theme from Solitude, and we can talk about what it was like to work together and how we approached creating music for that, how you wrote it. Here's the Solitude main titles. So right away, there's a very ambient feel to it. The film, I remember we had a discussion, you reminded me of this the other day, that because the film was made on a shoestring budget and digital video had just kind of released these cool prosumer cameras that you could actually use to create broadcastable film if you shot it in PAL and then transferred it to NTSC, which was, or transferred it to film, which was our plan. We could make a decent film with video, but it was video, so it didn't feel the same as a film shot on 35 millimeter film or 16. And so we wanted to try a different approach.
Yeah. What I remember is you and Susan, like, I remember being very specific. You said, like, we're telling story differently, and it's different. Like, this does not look like film. And so what I remember was you clearly, the challenge you gave me is like, we don't want this to sound like traditional film music. And I think it was probably scary. Turned down just a hair, probably because of these strings. And you also reminded me that it was the end title song, which you already had the rights to. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was interesting because there was a song that I knew would be perfect for the end title. It was by Spain. It was called "It's So True," and it kind of had the bass guitar as a major part of the instrumentation. We knew we wanted that, and we had talked to Josh Hayden, who wrote the song, and he was generous in letting us license it. So we knew that we were going to end up there.
Right. So that was one of the influencing thing. That was one of the things that you had that influenced the sound of the score, because this was low budget, and so I had to use what I had, and so the bass guitar became the instrument. And a lot of these textures actually come from a bass guitar that I sampled all the natural harmonics in the series on each string. So it would get an octave higher, octave and a fifth, 2 octaves higher, and then I think 2 octaves and a third. And I would have that for each string. And then I put all of this into the equivalent of Pro Tools, whatever I was using at the time, Studio Vision, as audio. And I composed it as collage, which I'd never done before. And I think this was one of the first projects I worked on where I started to embrace being uncomfortable with with the writing process, and knowing that there would be good solutions from it. And this was a totally different way of writing, and it's still one of my favorite pieces.
This is the love theme where he added the piano, which I always loved. And there was something that happened on Solitude that ended up happening on the other 2 collaborations that we've done, where you are inspired to write a cue, and it's a great cue, and we play it against picture, and we come to the realization that it's not for this movie, and we would quote unquote reject the piece of music, even though it was a great piece of music. And so on Solitude, it was called Driving to Nowhere. This was a piece that we didn't put in the movie, but it ends up on the soundtrack because you loved it so much. And everybody loved it. It was such a great track. As a composer, does it hurt your ego to have a cue rejected?
Not anymore. You don't have to play it anymore. I can't. I'm listening to it, and then I'm critical of it, and then I'm hating myself, and I'm trying to be engaging with you. No. To answer, it's a great question, and I learned early on that to be a film composer, you can't be that precious about your music. Otherwise, this is not the job for you. You need to be able to just use the information and move on. And even if it's a great piece of music, you find out why it's not right, and we'll have other examples of that as well. But you just ask questions. Why is it not right? And every rejected cue gets you closer to what will be successful to getting cues approved. And understand that my job is to please the director, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's really what the collaboration is about, and you have to embrace that. I mean, I've loved our collaborations. I mean, some of the music I've written for your films is some of my favorite music. So it's totally worth getting the rejected cues.
There's a correlation. As an editor, I edit a lot, and you present cuts and you feel good about them, and you're like, what do you think? And they're like, no. And you just have to roll with the punches. And even as a writer, like, you write a draft, you're going to write something that's bad. You can't jump to good. You have to, it's an incremental process. And so getting, like you said, a rejected cue is getting you closer. It's not a rejection that sets you back. It's like a first draft of a screenplay, or it's your first cut. It's the assembly cut or the rough cut that gets you closer to where you're going. And while you may have a plan in mind, you have to be open to shifting and letting the collaboration process inform you.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of David Sedaris. I've been watching his masterclass, and I never realized what a craftsman he is. Like, he has 14, 15 drafts, and he reads some of his drafts while he's on book tour. So he's constantly testing it out. He's actually co-writing it with the audience. He's finding out what is working and what's not working before it lands at the final version. It's really impressive.
It's almost like stand-up comedy to get to have a writer engage the audience so directly and to use that feedback.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting. I highly recommend it.
On the next film we did, which is called The Act, that premiered at Sundance in 2005, stars Deborah Jo Rupp. It's about a comedian who, it's this kind of short, it's a short film, and it's a drama about a comedian. Let me put it that way. And you can find it on Vimeo, on my Vimeo page, which is vimeo.com/Pi Ware. And Andrew wrote an amazing end titles cue, which we loved, but it kind of had this circus feel to it. So it made her seem a little, we thought at the time, seem a little crazy. And that wasn't the loving end feel that we wanted, but it was such a great cue that I ended up putting it on a mix CD. I make mix CDs and put them on Mixcloud. You can find me there and listen to the different mix CDs that I put together as sort of like audio journeys. And I remember that cue was so good that we were like, we love it, but we can't use it. And so we're going to take it and hopefully repurpose it. And I think you have a whole library of songs, right? You have a consonant library, and I think Bulletproof Bear, you take these cues and then you're able to use them in other projects.
Yeah, so absolutely. And the Solitude cues have seen a lot of use.
Oh, that's right. What was the latest series that the Solitude cue was in?
I think used in Why We Fight, this Emmy-nominated series that's on ESPN Plus now. This was on season 1, and it became one of the sub-themes that would get used throughout the season. So that was used there.
That's amazing. I love it that the music lives on in other forms,
Yeah. Oh, and I'm reminded, it was also used in my partner Gil Talmey's, he scored this film called Building the American Dream, which was a festival darling last year. And I guess they used it in that one as well.
Oh, great. That's so cool. I got to check that film out. So the rejected cue that we loved in Skin Deep actually has an even more interesting story. I'll play it and you can maybe tell the story.
Before you do, though, I just wanted to add to that is that, you give me you do something which is really great as a filmmaker, for a composer, which is you give freedom within a defined world. And that's really all we can ask for as composers, which is great. It's like, let us know what your world is and where the boundaries are, And then we have this freedom to explore that world and create new worlds within that world. And so I think that's what I've been able to do, is get that freedom. And sometimes when I'm writing for your film, I may not, it's like, I may think, I don't know if this is right, but I'm really having fun writing it. I'm really enjoying it. And most of the time you're like, that's fantastic, I love it. And sometimes you're like, yeah, great music, not quite right for this film. And then we have a discussion, and it becomes a valuable, key insight onto, how to solve future cues.
Mm-hmm. Should we talk about the approach to Skin Deep before we start playing some music, or should we jump into the cue?
Into where are we at?
So the cue that I was going to play is it's the original cue for the main titles.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about this. I think you were still in rough cut stage, and so I was coming up with a theme because we knew we needed a theme for this. And I mean, do you remember? I have some memory of the direction you gave me. Do you?
I remember just loving this, but what was the direction that you remember?
I think it was the fact that this is really a film about people who are suffering, and we didn't want to lose focus of that we want to not honor it, but we want to see it for what it is, without judgment, and maybe with empathy too. And that's what I wrote.
So I remember hearing this, and it had this tender piano theme that had a little bit of mystery in it, but a lot of emotion and a lot of humanity. And I fell in love with it. I thought it was great. And this is an interesting case where I didn't reject the cue. Andrew rejected the cue, or rather, Andrew thought, after we listened to it, and I was like, I'm good. This is a wonderful piece of music. This is great for our opening titles. It's got some mystery in it, especially in the second half.
This part right here.
And you said, you know what? I can do better. I can create something with more energy that starts the film off with more of an engaging and even more mysterious, but also with an engine kind of feel to it. And so that this you shelved this like just went away, and then.
But hold on, before you play it, just because it's so funny, like, because my memory is a little different. I thought all of that came from you. I thought everything you said, like the fact that it was too sad, I thought that was you. And I thought you, because I thought we watched it together and we were like, yeah, it's really great, but it's so sad. And I'm like, yeah, this is the opening of the film. Like, we don't want to open up sad.
That's right. We sat together in that office in Beechwood, and you kind of led the charge, but I agreed with you. Yeah. When we were assessing it. I mean, that's my memory. Who knows? Yeah. But I think we agreed that it was too sad for the open. And so Andrew one day had this. And so you can hear the harp. I'll turn it up for a sec. And he's using the harp, which is a mysterious instrument, but also a beautiful instrument that we were inspired to use, because while I was in production, I was listening to a band called the Barr Brothers, and they have this amazing record called The Sleeping Operator. And it was so inspirational to me that I wanted to take some of their instrumentation, because you have to answer that question, like, okay, we're writing film music. What should it sound like? And it's a myriad of answers. I mean, it could sound like anything. And so I wanted to take things that had given me spirit and strength and emotion throughout the filmmaking process and carry that into the composing, into the instrumentation of our soundtrack. So the Barr Brothers have a harp. They're a post-rock indie band, but they have a harpist. she's fantastic, and it kind of separates their sound from everybody else out there. And so I suggested using the harp, which I thought was a good idea.
Right. Yeah. You can turn that off now. Just because I wanted to add to that, which is you've got great taste in music too. You've turned me on to a lot of amazing music, and that's actually one of the fun things for me, is having you do that so that I can start building a sonic palette that is inspiring. And that was one of the clues. That was one of the things that helped me with the instrumentation for this, the harp and that. You turned me on to Nick Mulvey. Nick Mulvey?
Yeah.
Who plays acoustic guitar in this really interesting way. It's very similar to the way Gustavo Santaolalla also writes film music, writes his music with a, and so with his stringed instruments. And for this one, I used Ron Rocco, and it's just evocative, and we both really liked it. I mean, I think Tom Putnam had asked a question about the instrumentation for this, which I think is probably a good time to answer that, even though we're not the Q&A yet, but it'll work to answer it here, because he says this instrumentation to reflect the unusual illness. And I think for this film, unlike Solitude, where we wanted to create something that was unfamiliar, for this one, we chose to be more familiar with the music, because we want to focus on the human condition, the condition of these characters and subjects. And so that sonically, we wanted to use more familiar instruments, piano, harp.
Yeah. And one of the reasons that we wanted it to be so familiar, not entirely familiar like it was cliche, but like to use familiar things, is because, we were thinking about the audience, and it's like, who is this film for? I mean, it's for a general audience, yes, but then specifically it's for a family that has a Morgellons patient in it. And so it's a weird disease with skin lesions and fibers coming out of the skin, which is a bit gross to most people. And so we wanted to create a counterpoint, beautiful music that would help draw the audience in and set them at ease in a way so that they could continue to watch and get the information that they need for their family to come back together.
Yeah, you were really clear that when we saw these lesions, that we weren't playing this like, ew, look at that, or like making it dark and tense. I mean, you could see it, and these people were suffering, but I think the focus was on the suffering.
Instead of the like horror aspects, which you can do. You can sensationalize and be like, yeah, Morgellons, and you can be dark like they did in what was that Netflix special, Afflicted, right, where the music really gives this dark feeling, like everyone's lying, and it sort of poisons the viewer against the patients over the first 2 episodes of the series.
Right.
We wanted to do the opposite. We wanted to bring your empathetic qualities out as a viewer, and we did it through Andrew's music. Yeah,
and I got to use some of my favorite instruments, and one of them is that hubcap right there, which I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry, what? You used a hubcap in the soundtrack, Andrew?
Do you recognize this sound? I would use it to accent things. And there's one cue with, I have to look at it, but I use.
No, you must have processed that pretty heavily.
Probably. It's not highly featured, but it was fun because I found places for the hubcap.
Nice. What other instruments did you use? You were using, so the Ron Rocco gives that kind of Gustavo Santaolalla feel to it that brings you in, a kind of a dreamy quality that kind of lets you float into the film. Piano obviously is incredibly evocative and emotional all the time.
Yeah.
And then you used was it the Rhodes piano?
Yeah, so and I'll just show you real quick. So I used my first synth, which I still own to this day, which I was so happy to use. It's called a Pro 1. It's an analog synthesizer. And I had it MIDI'd. A buddy of mine did it for me so I could actually use it with my computer. And there's my Rhodes. And with the Rhodes, I had fun. The Rhodes is actually responsible for a lot of the textures, kind of like in a way the bass guitar was on Solitude. I did the same idea with the Rhodes, where I basically, you never heard the notes really attacked. I would fade them in. It would be these, it was like my string section. I thought of it like that, just to evoke the chords and have these emotional pads. So I processed it highly so that you wouldn't really know it was a Rhodes, but it was, and it was inspiring. It was great to just like go to these instruments and try things.
I'll play a bit of a deep Rhode, which
Right.
is made with.
Yeah, it's all Rhodes. It's just two tracks, I think.
And this is a case where a cue that Andrew wrote existed before this film was made. I think this is a rejected cue from some other series. Is that right? Or you just wrote it as like a spec thing?
It was inspired by Why We Fight. It was never used in that series, but I loved it. And
Me too.
And this is a really great example of like, you took this cue and you chopped it up and you cut it with a scene. And I don't know, you were like on some sort of like, you were in the zone or something, because it was, I could not improve it. I mean, and I think I told you, like, if you gave me that scene without any music in it, I don't think I would have written anything as good as what you created by having this pre-existing music.
And I think just to give credit where credit's due, I think Tom Putnam helped me cut that scene. I think we cut it together or modified it together. He's a co-editor of the film, so I want to make sure that his name is in there when it comes to this cue being put in the scene where Charles dies. The main protagonist, Cindy Casey, had to watch her husband die in front of her and tried to save him. She's a registered nurse, and it's this tragic thing. And we just never had the money or resources to shoot the scene where he was taken to the hospital and the doctor gave the news. So all we could do was shoot kind of light coming through trees, and we needed a music cue that would give us the sense that his spirit was leaving his body. And this was the cue. Yeah,
I think it's just, it tackles it so sensitively, and it's filled with emotion. But I think if I wrote it, like, I would have maybe made it too heavy, maybe too maudlin. I don't know. But the tone that struck for that, it just really like floored me, because you're just sucked in to her story. And you just really felt for her and her loss.
So as an editor, I'm constantly dealing with the timing of music. I'm deconstructing songs and taking just one verse and just part of a chorus, or I'm taking a deep Rhode music cue and shortening it so it'll fit, and then figuring out where the emotional swell is and having that match where the emotional swell is in the story of the scene. What's it like as a composer? Because I feel like this would drive me bananas.
Right.
Like, you have to write music that's got to hit very specific timings.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Again, that's part of the gig. And I think film composers embrace that. You look for, every scene has a beginning and a middle and an end, and there may be shifts within it. Those shifts can be on a cut. Those shifts can be a story shift. They can be subtle. They can be dramatic, but oftentimes we plan that out. And I think you and I talked a little bit before, and I just think it's a really good thing to mention, is that I found as a composer that a well-cut scene has an inherent tempo to it. Not that you could actually, sometimes you can, but not that you could actually like beat it out, but I'll watch a scene and I'll feel a tempo. And sometimes when I write a cue and it's just not working, 9 times out of 10, when if I look at I know now to look at the tempo, and oftentimes it's because I'm feeling it wrong. And as soon as you feel the tempo right, I find like it really becomes easy to write. It even some of the changes in the music, all of a sudden, like you get that goosebump on your arm phenomena where like, oh my God, this is this is right. It tells you, like the film tells you. And that's the thing, like I'm constantly getting feedback we're reacting to the music and picture, and we're feeling it, and we're going to feel whether it's right or whether it's wrong. And so working within the constraints of a well-edited scene that's what we do.
That's great. Yeah, that seems to me to be the kind of amazing skill. And what's interesting is that's probably where our collaboration happened most, was figuring out where the shifts would occur within the music as in reference to the scene. So if something, was very sad and then we wanted to shift into hope, it was sort of like you and I would have discussions about, what, maybe it could come 5 seconds later when this line happens as opposed to 5 seconds earlier, the way it's written now. And that was where a lot of the kind of give and take happens with director and composer, at least for us in this project, and not so much in the fine tuning of instrumentation. Like you'll say, oh, I was like, I love this cue, like lock it, it's done. And you're like, well, I'm going to go through and do this and like kind of clean it up. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what you're talking about. Sounds great to me. But I know as an editor, like I do the same thing when people are like, it's great, don't need to touch it. Like, well, actually the timing's off here and I need to kind of, fine tune that effect there. What do you do what are the things that you do, the details that you kind of, the loose ends you tie up after I like locked?
Well, first I want to go back to what you're saying is like, which was resonating, which was that I lean on my directors, and I lean on you for knowing the emotional compass of the film all the time. And that would influence, that's what you say, maybe it's on this line, that's because you've been living with it, it, and that kind of feedback is invaluable, because sometimes I'll think it's this and you're like, no, it's not, it's really here. I was like, oh yes, of course. And so I really relied on you for a lot of those. As for tweaking, I'm kind of a composer that just starts with, I start writing and it's like a big rock slab, and I'm like, I'll work on one side of it and I'll chisel away and it'll start taking shape, and then I'll go on another and I'll send it to you when it's kind of in its, it's not quite, we haven't gotten to the polish point yet, but it's got the general idea. Just so it's enough for you to react to, because you can hear really what the music is doing. And so when it comes to polish, with this, when you approved a cue, it was probably more mixing things sonically, EQ, creating space for things, redoing certain performances. A lot of times maybe my stuff's a little bit out of time. If something's really I want to sound human, but I don't want to sound bad. So I might correct the timing of some of my performances. And because this was all done, in a computer, I could do that really easily. I can move things around. I could replay it. I could tell the computer, hey, put this in time, because I couldn't play it in time.
Nice. I like the soundtrack that you released. The cues, I don't know what you did. I have zero idea how you changed the cues and improved them. But all I can say is I feel them more deeply. Like when I'll listen to the soundtrack, the Skin Deep soundtrack in my headphones, if I'm biking, for example, and I'm like transported, and I don't know how you mastered it differently or whatever, but the polishing process, though I don't understand it in music, is fantastic.
Awesome. Cool. Glad you like it.
Oh yeah. So I know as far as instrumentation goes, we had some, we were kind of going outside of the box and pulling in things that were inspiring to me, Nick Mulvey, Bar Brothers, harp, Ron Rocco. But then there was also the theme of science, right? That's what we're dealing with a disease being researched. And we were like, let's go straight ahead on this one, like electronic keyboards. Right?
Yes. Yeah. That's where the analog synths came into play. That's where my Pro 1 came in, and some.
Oops, wrong track.
That's the Ron Rocco.
Oh, scoping for the track. Yeah, that was the Ron Rocco. This is This is a synth track called Scoping for the Truth.
Science.
And I think, sometimes you want to be subtle and creative, and sometimes you just need to kind of go straight ahead, and it's still great music.
And it would always have some element of something real, like this one has piano in it, and try to have some sort of emotional underlying element too. So we would always stay focused on our characters.
Yeah, it's not minimalist arpeggios over and over and over again on an electronic keyboard. There's a shade of science over top the emotional human feeling, and that was always a conscious decision, so that we're connecting the audience to the stories we're telling. And I think that was our big challenge, was how to draw people into the film where the content might be considered repulsive to some people. You see on the internet, people are like, "Ooh, I'm itching already," like just hearing just seeing the trailer. And our big challenge was to draw people in, and that's why I included a lot of the love story of Charles and Cindy, to bring in those human interest aspects. And it's why I think the music is so important and so successful and so prevalent. How many minutes? The film's 90 minutes. How many minutes of music is it?
70 minutes of music, and I wrote about 60 for it. So 60 minutes of music was original.
Wow. How does that compare to other films that you write?
For documentary, it's really interesting. It's an interesting conversation because, as you've probably seen, like documentaries have become scored more and more and more. I think for the most part, music in film, it has a much larger percentage of the film than it used to be. Whereas it used to be probably under 50%, probably for even all genres. Documentary, it's gotten into the 60 to 70% of the film range, and we're right in there, if not a little bit more.
Nice. So let me find here what we wanted to talk about. I have a note that I wrote down. It kind of goes with what we were talking about, how sometimes you want to attack instrumentation from a more creative point of view, and sometimes you want to go straight ahead and do things on the nose. And it happens with how you're going to pick the tone of the music too. So, if it's a sad scene, you can score sad to accentuate the emotion of the performance, or what you've captured in a documentary. And sometimes, like, everybody's seen Gladiator, right? If you remember, like, one of the first cues in that film is, they're battling and it's just brutal and everyone's killing everybody, and the exciting music changes to like a tragic slow song. And you haven't really met the characters that much, so it's this interesting perspective shift about the tragedy of war. Mm-hmm. For us, the cue that I remember being like giving us a little bit of trouble because we wanted to be a little tricky about it was in this part of the film. I'm going to actually share a screen here if I can get this to go. So in the Morgellons conference, there's a dermatologist named Dr. Feldman, and he comes to view it, and he engages people, but his empathy kind of dwindles. He's someone who has a persona of empathy. He doesn't actually feel empathy very much for other people, and that gets tested. It's fine for him to create a persona of an empathetic doctor when you're having 5, 10, 15-minute meetings with him about your psoriasis, but in the film, he engages a lot of Morgellons patients, and it doesn't go so well. And we did a montage of him sort of going through the conference, and we had, you have as a director and a composer, you're like, well, what do we want to do? Is it like do-do-do? Is it kind of a little engine that's going to go and has sort of this buoyant feel to keep us interested in learning the things that they're arguing about, or what? And because his empathy was dwindling, and I wanted to reflect the tragedy of that, where a doctor came to a conference and instead of building bridges, kind of burned the bridges. We wanted to sort of tell the audience, or let the audience feel the sadness of that tragedy. So Andrew wrote this fantastic cue. I think we went through a few cues, though.
I think we did. I think we did. You know, one thing that was nice about this was a 3-minute, in a way, it was a montage. We're still hearing dialogue throughout a lot of it, and it's just these misses, right? They're not able to connect. He's not able to see what they see. And so I think we took a little bit more of a macro, because it's not just sad and maudlin and melancholy. It's more of a comment of, this is real people, real situation, and of disconnection in a way.
Yeah. It's such a great cue.
Thank you.
I'm going to fade it down here.
DJ Pi Ware. Nice.
We find, that kind of music is so amazing because it can enhance an actor's performance in a narrative film, right? And it can bring out a dimension. So we brought out a dimension of storytelling in that scene that wasn't there just without music. And I think you can do that in a performance. You can play counterpoint to an actor's performance to make them feel more nuanced and have a wider breadth of ability, or you can just enrich their performance of joy or sadness with music, because music for me just is how you create emotion. Whether I'm working on a television show or our documentary or narrative, like, I know that music is going to be the thing that can grab us immediately and help us feel.
Yeah. I look at it in a subjective, objective way, like, where are we coming from? And so in the scene that you just showed with Feldman, we're very much looking down at them. That music isn't expressing how they're feeling. It's expressing a situation.
Right.
Opposed to Cindy's story, when it's much more of a subjective, the music is just with her all the way. It's part of her. And so I look at it as like, where are we? And that's where you came in. That's where you helped me figure out, like, are we with the subject, or are we commenting on the subject, or it's commenting on the situation? And so it's just a matter of musically, where are we placing the camera?
That's interesting. That is interesting. That's a really cool way to look at it. And so how do you start a cue? Do you just feel it or do you decide on the instrument first? How do you start?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of it comes from the director. It comes from all of our meetings. It's an accumulation of every creative conversation we've had up to the moment that I start writing. And so I always say, it's really imperative for directors to give as much information as possible. So you gave me sonically, you gave me sonic direction, you gave me emotional direction. You were giving me direction on subjective and objective use of music. We just weren't using those terms, about where are we at emotionally. And you take all that, and then I sit down and I watch the scene. And that's the magic. That's the mystery. I don't know. But I do know that, like, I couldn't write an honest piece of dialogue if my life depended upon it, but I watch a scene and all of a sudden I have an idea of, like, I know how this scene I know what to do for the scene. So I just use different language.
So you go, I know what to do for the scene, and then you go over to your Rhodes piano, or you go to the hubcap and you start writing it, or do you start on your keyboard and you're like, I'm going to MIDI this, I'm going to just sort of lay down the skeleton note-wise?
Well, for this film, this one was very much piano driven, melody driven. You know, in an era, we're actually coming back to melody, I think, cinematically. We've gone away from it for the last 20 years in some respects, not all the time. But you embraced it. And so you gave me permission. That was another thing, an influencing factor to, you know, go to just write some beautiful music in more of a traditional way. And so the piano was my go-to instrument for all the themes. I mean, it's the main instrument in the whole score too. So most of the time, piano for the science. I would go to the synths. For subtle ambient emotional cues, I would go to the Rhodes, and so it just depended on the scene. And so also your temp music, you had you temped it up really well. So sometimes that would be an influencing factor, and we would discuss it. We would discuss, you know, what's not right about it, and what is right about it. And when there was temp music in there that was right, I would look at what is that doing that's right. And a lot of times I would use similar elements, like, oh, it has a nice pulsing element. Okay, great.
That's an interesting thing we should make sure to talk about. The process of scoring a film it's not a silent film that you give a composer generally as a director. You, as an editor, you're putting the thing together, but you want to know how it feels. So you're using music that's already been written, temp music, temporary music. And you can pull that from anywhere because it's not going to be the final music. You can pull it from other films, scores, which is done quite a bit. You can pull it from a library. Andrew has a library that I was able to pull from. So I was using Andrew's music from other films, some of which was still in there. And that's a way, it's a conversation that the director has with the composer musically right there. It's like, this is how I feel about it. And then Andrew would be able to improve it most of the time. And then the difficulty as a director is if you love the temp music, you can fall in love with it. And then the composer writes a great piece of music and presents it to you, and you're like, I don't know. You know, and you're blind because you're in love.
That's right.
How do you deal with that?
Yes. So it's going to be a quick. We're going to be delving into this. Just a quick plug, and I'll talk more about it at the end. But my partner at Consonant Music, Gil, and I are going to be we've been doing this film music seminar, and we talk about temp love a lot and what can be done about it. And so we're going to be doing a free webinar series starting on May 13th, and I'll talk more about it later. But
where are you guys doing the series?
It is going to be, I think we're going to be using Zoom. So I'll plug it now. So you can find us on Facebook at Consonant Music. Pi, can you type that in while I'm talking?
Yeah. I'll put it in the comments over here. How do you spell it?
At KONSONANT, you know.
Not with a K. Well, I want to get it right.
Thank you.
It's an unusual spelling of consonant.
It is very true. Thank you for
Is it .com?
There's consonant.com, and then on Facebook, it's at Consonant Music. And if you follow us on Facebook, we're going to have information about it. But it's going to be a whole webinar series. My partner, Gil, who scored The Great Hack, we're going to be using that as similarly to this conversation. He's going to have a conversation with one or two of the producers on their scoring process of The Great Hack. And that's going to be extremely fascinating. So
yeah, great documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. So I recommend people, you can go onto Facebook, and we'll be sending information about that probably next week. Oh, thank you, Phil. Gil. There's a link right there to it. So to answer your question, temp love. Yeah, so I teach doc filmmakers, and we give this seminar, and we encourage filmmakers as much as possible to be realistic about the music they temp into their film. And we also give them fair warning. Beware, you may fall in love with this, and you may not be able to use it. So we try and encourage filmmakers not to put in a Coldplay song, or not to put in like a Hans Zimmer score when they have a budget for a composer that's just going to be able to, not have any live instruments, and it's all going to be synthetic. It's setting up expectations that the composer may not be able to beat. The goal, we're always trying to beat the temp. But sometimes the bar may be so high, you put in like a classic Stevie Wonder song. It's like, I, I, I can't beat that. So at the temping process, I ask filmmakers to put in music that is definitely, hopefully expresses the sound that what you're looking for, but in an attainable way for your budget. So that's what I say about temp love. And then also ask filmmakers if they know that they happen to be like a baby duck and they call, the first thing they see is mama. If that's what they are how they are with music, to possibly not temp a film. Allow the composer, because that may be too much of an influencing factor, or it may be too hard for them to let go of it. So, it depends on the filmmaker, but I always ask filmmakers to kind of like know thyself.
Great. I was just looking at some of the questions that are being asked. Lev asked about, when you're scoring a film, do you watch without any music the first time you see it, or do you prefer to hear the reference tracks as a director used as a temp? So you listen to the temp music, or are there any cases where you ask for it stripped out?
I generally get it stripped out when I start working on it, in which case I'll get dialogue on one channel, temp music in the other, or they'll just send me a dialogue track and a temp music track, so I can then not listen to it. Generally, at the spotting stage, when spotting session is when the last meeting, when the filmmaker the filmmaker and the composer decide where the music's going to be in the film, and the composer starts writing. So I will want to listen to it at the spotting session. I find it useful. What I generally tell the filmmakers is, I really want to know what you hate about the temp music, and I want to know what you love about it. Let's assume it's temp music for the most part might be functional, but it might not be really serving the film as well as it could. So I just want to know those two things, really. That's the most important to me. Like, what do they love about it? So I can find that out, because I want to use that. And what do they hate about it? So I can make sure I avoid that at all costs.
Do you ever get paralyzed with fear when someone's like, hey, can you match this can you improve this Hans Zimmer score that I put in there? Or are you just so experienced, you're just like, yeah, I'm not going to let my ego get in the way?
I haven't been... The times that I've been paralyzed with fear hasn't been in those cases. It happened when I was much younger. I mean, what's coming to mind right now is Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny. They had temped in a piece from Stargate, David Arnold's Stargate, into this really cool scene in the film. And it was the right approach. Like, I knew, like, okay, and I just wanted to take it even further because it's a comedy. So I had license to, like, I'm going to add choir to this, and I'm going to even take this further and make it this, like, Lord of the Rings epic moment, because that's exactly where the characters were at. They felt it was an epic moment, so it was right to play it like an epic moment. And I was a little intimidated by the music because the temp music was really good, but being able to write to picture, there's things that a composer can do that temp music just can't. So I could pause and stop and catch little things and do things that the temp music can't do. And then at the end of the day, people are like, oh my God, this is even better than the temp music. And that's because it was scored to picture. And I was able to turn at every moment that needed attention, whereas temp music rarely can do that.
Lev also asked, what was the most challenging section of this film, Skin Deep, to compose to?
Do you know? What?
Well, I know we struggled with the scene that we just showed, Dr. Feldman. That montage was difficult for the editing of it, because we originally had it as like 2 sections,
right?
And people were, when I showed it in rough cut form to some people just to get their reactions, they were like, wow, this gets really long. And I was like, well, I gotta just make a montage, but I can't make a montage because you gotta hear sound ups, and not only that, you gotta hear a bit of debate. And so it was a real struggle there. And then I know we went through iterations and then sort of figured out, like you were talking about, to be objective and to sort of comment on the tragedy of the missed connections, that they're missing each other.
Yeah. The cue that's coming to mind is the Ed Who cue at the end. Is that Bonds of Brotherhood, or no? Is that it's
Yeah.
after that?
Strengthening the bond.
Strengthening the bond. And it was a 3-part cue, and I came in. So here's the thing. So you'll notice that what's on the soundtrack is actually what's on the film, because I built it into like a really big ending, and it kind of became a little too indie rock for this film. And so what's on the soundtrack is is not. But I struggled with this one a little bit. We had some back and forth.
I like it now, but I do remember it was the electric piano was something we went back and forth on.
Yeah.
With the Ed Who theme. Yeah.
But if you skip
and I remember what's that?
If you skip to the end, like the drums come in, which we never went indie.
This thing.
Right.
This is great to listen to.
Right.
Now, are you saying the drums weren't in the film?
That that was like, you didn't want it to get that big, so basically it was a stripped out version of this. This is an example of where I wanted to go with it, and for you it was I don't remember exactly why, but we were also pressed for time. So
I think I remember this, and I just felt like it just was too much. It just was too much. I felt.
Yep.
But listen, this is a great example where it's like, for the director, it's too much for the film.
Right.
As a listener to the music, I'm like, that's great.
Yeah.
Great percussion, and it gets me going. But it got in the way of something I felt in the film.
No, and I agreed.
Yeah. And that's it's always important, when you're collaborating, to just kind of not die on hills for things, you know what I mean, when you disagree. But it's hard too, because with music or with film, it's these things are expressions of yourself sometimes, and it's difficult not to get wrapped up in that. Here's just a real easy question for you. Hi, Andrew. You seem like a very talented individual. Which instruments can you play? Asks Renee von Vettem.
Renee, thanks for the question. I think I'm a film composer. I think another reason why I'm a film composer, because I'm not a very good musician. One of my favorite things is to hire other players to play play my music. They bring something to it. But interestingly, for your films, Pi, I don't think I've been the only musician.
I think we used somebody for the act. Didn't we? We brought somebody in. Voice? Did Petra sing on that?
Petra didn't sing on the act.
Maybe I'm confusing another film that you scored.
I've worked with
I think I attended the sessions that you were doing.
Oh yeah, maybe. But for your films, I find it's highly personal. So I'm not writing very virtuosic music, but I play piano. I can fake it on guitar just to get some sounds and bass. The drums, actually, I played those drums on that piece. Like I actually played them. I fixed them up. I did everything individually, like, because you can play, here's the kick drum, and now here's the toms, and now I'm going to do the snare drum, and then I can go control them and make it sound like I'm actually a halfway decent drummer. I played everything on this score myself, but it's pretty simple music.
Renee also has a question about your favorite classical composer. And I guess I'll add to it. And he says, I love Handel, Bach, and Vivaldi. How about you? And then I guess my question is, what classical composers influence you, or even modern composers have influenced you?
Love Handel, Bach, especially Bach and Vivaldi. The composers that influenced me, I'm just going to who I love, who I was excited about when I was first deciding, started first scoring films. and I love Ennio Morricone and Nino Rota. So Nino did all the Fellini films. Ennio Morricone scored hundreds of movies, but most famously Sergio Leone films, plus The Mission, Once Upon a Time in the West, Once Upon a Time in America. And those composers inspired me greatly. And it was Morricone, I think, who really showed me you can throw different styles of music together for spaghetti westerns. You can take electric guitar and put it with an orchestra and a choir and rock elements and distortion and harmonica through crazy weird delay. I mean, this is all in the 70s, and he created a whole new sound that had not existed before that. So those would be my influences.
I always, I approach Andrew and I'm always starting with like, well, Philip Glass is great. I think a lot of directors we kind of are drawn to a lot of similar composers because they just nailed it. Thomas Newman's score for American Beauty, particularly in the early aughts, was something everybody was drawn to and would put into their temp music. Mm-hmm. Philip Glass is always, for me, such a great starting point. And a lot of those minimalist composers, Michael Nyman, and just for a documentary, you're drawn to that kind of music because it has an engine, with these arpeggiated chords. It's driving you forward, but it's not drums, which kind of are a little much and can take you out of engaging into the information that's coming out of a documentary.
Yeah. Philip Glass's sound married with documentary in just a revelatory way that influenced docs ever since his first documentary film score. I don't know what the first was. I mean, Thin Blue Line comes to mind, but there may have been some before that.
I don't know if Koyaanisqatsi preceded it, but
yeah, it may.
That was earth-shattering.
Absolutely, and that might have been it. I don't really know. He's very much the John Williams in a way, but he actually his sound influenced documentary because he had his sound and it just worked so perfectly for documentary. And you're right. I mean, I think that motor in his music absolutely just raised the stakes in documentary and pushed it along in a very, artful, thoughtful, smart, intelligent way.
Yeah, I think that like the engine, the motor is really important. We talked about it a lot because this film, Skin Deep, it has a lot of science in it, and the stories are about illness and not life and death. And so illness is less compelling just by nature of having lower stakes than life and death, right? If all these people have been dying like left and right, then that's a stakes level, that brings a lot more jeopardy to the table. And so because it was about illness and real diminishment of quality of life and suffering, we needed to kind of lift that up and carry it along and make it float along the top. And that's always it's like, how do you build an engine that's just not the standard, like just 4/4 drum beat, like a rock and roll, because everyone loves rock and roll. Like, how do you build an engine? Do you have different tactics that like tricks or go-tos when you get the assignment, like, hey, we need to build an engine here?
That's an interesting question. For this one, I mean, it came from the theme, and the theme was not very far afield from some of those engines established by Philip Glass. I would say it's actually not quite as fast. It's a little bit slower. It's a little bit sadder. But I think I thought more about engine in some of the scientific cues with the synthesizers, where I could do these arpeggios that only synthesizers can do really well. Strings can do it as well too, but we didn't have that to rely on for the sound of this score, so we used electronics for it.
Lance has a question for you.
Yeah.
Andrew, can you mention some of the other composition work you have done in the past? Film, commercials, art?
Oh, yeah. So my first film was Biodome, comedy with Pauly Shore. And then I did, you can look me up on IMDb. Started with a lot of comedy. I did a series called The King of Queens, which aired for many seasons on CBS, still continues to air. I did some offbeat comedy films that didn't do so well. One was called Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag, but I'm proud of the music in that, with Joe Pesci. I did a film that went straight to video for New Line called Overnight Delivery. That's probably maybe where Petra and Rachel sang on my Overnight Delivery score. That might have been it, because I think we may have.
That's a Paul Rudd movie, right?
Paul Rudd and Reese Witherspoon, straight to video. But
written by Kevin Smith, if I recall.
He is one of the credited writers. Yes, I think he came in on a polished stage on that.
That's a funny story. That was before I met you, I think, because I did the Library of Congress transcription of that movie and know that movie very well because I watch it 7 times in a row on a 35 millimeter Moviola projector.
Amazing. That's right. I forgot about that. Amazing.
Tough job.
More recently, I did a Tenacious D in the Pick of Destiny. And I've been, aside from scoring Pi's film recently, I've also been music supervising. It's something that I've really enjoyed doing as well. Basically being in charge of licensing and finding music. And I've been doing it for some Netflix shows that most of the music, there's very little that the composer, some of them don't even have a composer. So I just did the first season of I Think You Should Leave, which is on Netflix. We've started season 2. They were into day 3 of production when they had to get shut down, but that'll come back once we resume when that happens. And
we're in the middle. It is April 26th. We're in the middle of coronavirus. If you're watching this as a recorded interview. Yeah.
And another Netflix series called Astronomy Club. I music supervised that. So that's all that comes to mind. I've done at the moment.
There's a couple more questions we'll take. 2 more. Here's one from Drew Devereaux. Hey, Andrew, I remember years ago, Gil gave great suggestions on managing your time while working creatively, suggesting you have to know when to stop and move on to other work and or when to revisit work. What are your time management suggestions regarding working on both professional with deadlines and collaborators and personal projects?
That's a great question. Wish Gil was on this. He's really great with time management. I start backwards from in my calendar. I look at when do I have to deliver music to the director, to Pi, and I plan everything backwards from there. So starting from the end, that's delivery. So before delivery, I have to mix it. So I have to allot time for that. Before that, I have to have my recording sessions to record the music. Prior to that, I have to get the music approved because I can't move to the recording sessions until it gets approved. So then there's a final approval date. And then before that, that's the writing and approval process, collaborative time with Pi. I know how many minutes of music from our spotting session we need to create. And it can really just get down to, I need to complete X amount of minutes per day before I go to sleep. Sometimes I'll create a spreadsheet where, oftentimes I will. If I'm really under the gun, we had a leisurely schedule on this. We worked on this over the course of 5 months, really. And it wasn't until the very end, till you locked, where we really had to speed up the process. But we really got to fine tune things in a really lovely way, which I really appreciated on a creative level. Oh, and from the spreadsheet, if I'm not meeting my quota, I just update it daily. And it's like, oh, now I instead of 2 minutes a day, I'm up to 2.5 minutes a day. Or if I have a real productive days and Pi approves the music, great, this is off the list. Now it knocks me down to 1 minute and 45 seconds per day. So I pretty much hit my quota, and then I can live life.
Nice.
But let me restate that. Writing music is living life. So, that I didn't say that correctly. I can then do other things, be a husband, be a father.
Yeah. You don't want to take that work home, I guess. Well, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to take those worries about composing or, into your personal life when you're being a husband, being a father.
Yeah.
So having those, like hitting your quota, like is You don't have to worry. That's what's nice. As an editor, sometimes I'll be on projects where we're just working from this time to this time. And then, at 7 p.m., you're done and you go home, and there's no editing equipment in front. You don't take the work home. As a director, I constantly lived with this thing for 5 years, 4.5 years, where I just would try and figure out the best way to execute this and find the balance between science and human interest, and figure out, do we want to show, certain aspects of the story or not, how to refine it without losing things that were important and what is important. And so if you can see, I'm already spinning into anxiety and too many questions.
Yeah. It's the same, it's the same thing with composing. Like if I'm stuck with something, I find the best way to solve it is to go to sleep, because all those, like, whatever I'm wrestling with, after a good night's sleep, I wake up in the morning with just a ton of fresh ideas. Like, oh, I can try this, I can try this, I can try this, and I can react to it, and I'm not sleep deprived, and I can have quick responses to it and move on. I did want Sean Thompson, related to this, which asked a question: what's the shortest amount of time you've been given to work on a film? The shortest was 3 weeks, and it was a score called All I Want, that starred
Is it Franca?
Yeah, Franca Potente, Mandy Moore, and Bilbo Baggins, Elijah.
Also known as.
Yeah, also, sorry. Sorry, Elijah. And had 3 weeks, and it freaked me out, and I was totally scared, and I thought my score would suck, and it's one of my favorite. It's it's a score I'm really proud of. And so the longest, I don't know, this was 5 months. Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny, I was on for a long time. They were in post on that for a long time too, 4 or 5 months, I think, as well.
Yeah, we had longer on Skin Deep than we thought we would, and it was just a function of when we were going to premiere. Yeah, and the premiere just kept getting further and further away. So it was like, oh, well, we'll continue to work on it. But, and I think that time, I remember Robert Redford talking about making Quiz Show, and he had it got pushed for a year, but he would still have discussions with the director of photography about the film at dinner for 12 months. They would just go at the dinner, talk about things, and they had longer to plan, and they felt like the end result was better because they had so much pre-production planning time. And I feel like this score turned out so well, in part because it gave you time to find inspiration, or to retool things, or rethink things, or regather things, and just really hit your creative stride at 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I got more time to experiment and vary and learn my theme. Really put it through its paces. Seeing how it, we immediately knew it was too sad, or it actually was sad perfectly for one part of the film, but how do we make it accentuate the mystery side of it? How do we have it more an attention kind of element? So I got to workshop that more, and time always helps me. So
I've got one question. I don't know if you want to answer any more of these questions, but the last one that I definitely want to make sure we get to is an interesting question from Lance. Andrew, did you ever cry while making this film when considering the pain and suffering of the patients with Morgellons disease? And I guess we can expand that if the answer is no. How do you deal with the emotional engagement of the actual art you're scoring?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I've never cried when watching any film that I'm scoring, because I'm helping. I'm a storyteller. I'm just doing it with music. I know that, not while I'm working on it, but when I did see, when you sent me the film, and I saw how you cut a deep road for Cindy's story when Charles died, which is arguably like one of the sadder points of the film. I was very much moved by it, but I was moved by it as a as an audience member, right? Because I was reacting. I was not participating, and I was taking it in. Whereas when I'm working on a film, I'm telling story, and so I think it's important that I maintain my objectivity all the time. It doesn't mean I can't feel sad or be emotional about. But like when I'm writing that theme for stab to the heart,
Stab to the heart,
stab to the, I very much knew that I was loving the music, and it was expressing what I wanted it to express. But I'm always a little bit distanced, I think, from where the characters are at.
Did we even complete the second part of that story about this? Stab to the Heart? So this was the original titles that he wrote. And he put it on the back burner and wrote a more energetic, open.
Right.
But we got to this part of the film. This is after the Morgellons study by the CDC comes out, and the media takes it as Morgellons is fake and these people are all cuckoo. And that tragedy was rough, and we needed a piece of music, and we remembered, I don't remember who, if it was you or me, but we remembered, oh, what about that theme that we loved? And then you took it and you repurposed it just a little bit, but not much, I don't think, and put it in. And we used it to score the sort of emotional reaction of the patients to hearing that the CDC basically dismissed their disease.
And it's a really good example of when you get a theme right, which, I feel like, we got it right for this film. It works. So you're right. I think what I did is I took the main titles and I put it up against the sequence, and it was almost perfect. And that happens sometimes. It kind of was like, it's like the film said, yes, you were meant for this film. So because I don't think I tweaked it. I did a little bit, but structurally, it was almost exactly what I wrote for the main titles, but it worked with picture in this totally other scene, totally different scene.
Yeah. I'll just sort of go back to the question you answered before this, which was about, emotionally engaging. And it's interesting because, you're a viewer when you're a viewer, and then you're a filmmaker when you're making a film. It's a different role. You become a different person. At least I feel this way. A different part of yourself takes over. So when you're filming and you're dealing with lots of ill people who are suffering, and you're dealing with scientists and whatever, for me, I would kind of elevate my mind and try and see this from a bigger perspective and make sure that I was capturing that. Whereas, if I'm watching a film like this, I might be that like judgmental guy on the couch going, that's ridiculous, but you don't behave that way in the field. And when you're editing, you generally try and engage, but you don't let yourself become overwhelmed by the emotion. You recognize it and try to, like you said, participate in it. But every once in a while, though, it gets you. And with this film, for me, it was when Kelly Pickens died by suicide. That kind of affected me for a couple of days when I was trying to edit, and it would lead to some tears, just working on her scenes and seeing the loss of such an energetic force, and it wasn't just the cause of Morgellons disease that she was fighting for. She was fighting for this justice within her community, because there had been a police officer who was corrupt and was arresting people. And I had when she was telling me about it originally, I thought, oh, that seems a little hard to believe, but it was true. She was fighting two very controversial fronts in Austin, Texas, at the Morgellons disease conference, and in a city right outside of Atlanta where she lived.
Wow.
And so when we lost her, that was rough, and it kind of carried over into my editing for a couple of days. But I do think it's interesting. It's you become a role player. You become a different part of yourself when you're making the film. And so, sad as the film was, I didn't get overwhelmed too often.
Right, and it's not my film too. I mean, it's like the way I approach it is that my job is to make the film everything it wants to be. Each scene, everything, what that, it's like, make it as great as I can, whether it's achieving it or not. My goal is to approach it as if it's Citizen Kane.
Mm-hmm.
That's my job, and not judge it, but just understand, like, this is what this scene needs. This is what it is doing or wants to be doing, and take it there, and hopefully even take it farther to create that beautiful cinematic magic when everything comes together in a beautiful way.
Well, I think everything came together for Skin Deep, in my opinion. I just am proud as punch of the score that you created. Thank you so much, man.
It was my pleasure. I'm really proud of it too, and it was just an honor to work with you and create this with you.
Great. So for everybody joining us, thank you for participating. We just wanted to give a couple of shouts out for some upcoming events. Andrew and his composing partner Gil are putting on some Q&As themselves and some webinars, and free webinars, the best kind. And you can find out about that at their Facebook page. So facebook.com/consonant music. That's KONSONANT music.
Yep.
Or at consonant.com. And you can listen to a lot of their score. As Andrew mentioned, Gil just scored The Great Hack, which is a fantastic documentary. If you haven't seen it, definitely check that out. It's on Netflix. And there are a lot of other of these Q&As for Skin Deep here on crowdcast.io/Pi Ware, PIWARE, or on our Facebook page, the Skin Deep Facebook page, which is at facebook.com/Morgellons movie, MORGELLONS movie. Mostly with not the filmmakers, but with the participants. So Cindy Casey, Dr. Ginger Savely, who else we got? Edward Hu appeared, Dr. Harry Quinn Schoen. Lots of folks who participated in the film engage with me, including Dr. Feldman, where things get a little intense in the Q&A. You might want to check it out. All right. Anything you want to add before we say goodbye, Mr. Gross?
I just love this. I don't think you and I would have been doing this if we weren't, all having to, be inside or be at home. So this was great to be with you and to be with everyone who participated. And thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Take care. Bye-bye.